Thank you for being here. For those folks who are present, I appreciate the making the effort to be here in person. We hope we have hundreds watching via Facebook, and like I said, we'll also record this to post on our website to you. If you can't make any of the presentations, you can at least see the full presentation via website. We have our slides up there now, but it lacks a little bit if you don't have the presentation, the verbal presentation. We also have a 4-minute explainer video for our tax ratification election. That was posted late last week, and that's on our website as well. So more details coming, but tonight we want to do a couple of things and walk you through a number of slides in order to talk about the need for a bond election, or the need for especially a tax ratification election. I want to give you a little bit of a history of school finance in Texas and sort of set the stage for why we're asking for some of these things, and to explain your tax bill and so forth. So I want to set it up first. Then we'll talk about our bond election. We'll talk about our TRE, how that impacts your tax rate or your tax bill. We'll cover a lot of ground. This takes about 35 or 40 minutes, so buckle up. I'm going to go as quickly as possible, and then we'll take plenty of questions, and I'll stay as long as you'd like to answer questions. First of all, the history of school finance. In 1994, the state of Texas created the Robin Hood or recapture system to address 13 school districts in the state of Texas that were considered property wealthy. Very, very small number of districts were initially part of that configuration. Most likely Lake Travis, Highland Park, South Lake Carroll, Coppell, maybe Alamo Heights. I'm making those up, but that seems logical that those would be the initial districts. The problem is that has been expanded way, way beyond its initial task. It's now over 240 districts, and it creates a revenue stream of over $2.7 billion. The problem with that is that number's too big to walk away from now. The state cannot do without that revenue source. It's more than double the lottery. We don't even get all of the lottery money. That doesn't all go to public education. And nowadays, even the $2.7 billion taken in recapture is not all spent on education. It is now being funneled off into other areas for state work. In 2006, the state compressed your local school tax rate from $1.50 maximum down to $1. We also lost a third of our revenue over that 2-year time period. I'll show you in a history of our tax rate when that occurred. That's good for you. That was to have been offset by the creation of the business margins or franchise tax. That was created, but it did not near compensate for that loss of revenue. Ended up, districts in Texas lost about $5.4 billion. It was the first time since the Gilmer-Akins Act of 1949 that Texas public education was not funded to the constitutionally required amount. And districts like Lake Travis have never recovered. We got about a fourth of the money we lost during that transition back, and we've never caught up and are not likely to. And finally, when we went to the compression of the tax rate and Robin Hood was created, the state created an additional funding source called ASSETAR, Additional State Aid for Tax Reduction. It was to have been a permanent funding source for school districts to make sure districts did not go below a certain financial operating level from the state revenue side. That was to have been a permanent source, except in the 84th session 2 years ago, the legislature decided to eliminate that, and it has disappeared this fall, reducing our state aid by an additional $2.2 million. 10 years ago, here is how the local revenue compared to the state revenue for the average school district in Texas. In 2006, local revenue made up 44.8% of district revenue, and the state made up 44.8%, and the balance came from federal dollars for the average school district in Texas. 10 years later, it looks like that, and those columns are going in diminishing or opposite directions. Much more of our revenue for the average school district is coming from local resources as opposed to the state as a result of Robin Hood and so forth, things like that. That's for the average school district in Texas. Here's what it looks like for Lake Travis ISD. Vast majority of our revenue, 93.4%, comes from local sources, less than 5% from the state and 1% or less from the federal government. My point of that is saying we are primarily dependent in Lake Travis ISD on our own revenue. We get very, very little help from the state of Texas because of our high property values. So, as a further setup, a very common misconception in Lake Travis ISD, in our community, among our staff, to be honest with you, among the legislature, everyone thinks we have lots and lots of money. from several sources. Nearly 600 students arrived this year new to our district. We've added 4,200 students over the last 10 years, 76% growth. People assume those students are coming in with lots and lots of money. My home value over the last 5 years has probably gone up 40+%. People assume that value stays in our school district because they're rising, their tax bills are going up, we must have lots of money. And finally, significant amounts of new property values are being created. We'll add approximately 14,000 homes over the next 10 years, just home construction. Then you add to that H-E-B in the Oaks of Lakeway, Torchy's Tacos, Shipley's Donut, Lexus car dealership, Sonesta Hotel, Covert car dealership. All of this means lots and lots of money. That is the common misconception. The reality is a little different. 3 points I would want you to walk away with tonight. 42% of our budget this year, which is about $42 million this year, goes right off the top to Robin Hood payments. Our total budget's around $120 million. Before we spend a dime, we send $42 million of that right back to the state. That percentage has been as high as 50% and as low recently as 39%. It changes every year. Another district might be 5% of their budget. Eanes ISD is maybe 65% of their budget. It varies by district. Currently, ours is 42%, about $42 million. Add to that, we're one of 200 some odd districts in the state that offer our taxpayers a full 20% discount on your school taxes. If you have, the average home price in Lake Travis is about $500,000. If you have a $500,000 house, your school taxes are calculated on $400,000, not the full $500,000. It's optional homestead exemption. We give the full 20%. Great news for our taxpayers. It's a loss of $14 million a year in revenue to the school district. And then finally, probably the most critical point, if I had you remember one thing tonight about school finance, it would be, this is the most confusing thing for our legislators, our taxpayers, our staff, is any increase in local revenue, existing values or new values, is offset by an almost equal reduction to state aid. The state keeps the money. To give you a specific example, our district is 116 square miles. If you add up all of the taxable value in that area, it's a little over $10 billion in total taxable value. That number increased 2 years ago to a year ago by $10 million in new values. $10 million, that is existing values rising and going up, my house went up, and new values being created. $10 million in new revenue from 2 years ago to last year. Of that amount, the district kept $300,000. The state absorbs the rest. People think we have lots of money because our home values are high or our families are moderately wealthy or wealthy. The finance system takes care of a lot of that. If you put these three characteristics on any for-profit or business, it'd be hard for them to stay in business. And this is getting worse each year for the state, for Lake Travis and districts like ours. Here's a comment that was put on our Facebook page recently related to the announcement of a bond election. And this gentleman, very, not snarky at all, this parent said, so if the bond election is voted down, can't you do this work on what you collect? Seems like with the student growth and the valuation, my tax dollars should go up enough to cover the projects. I hope you have a surplus. That is the misconception I'm talking to you about. People think we have lots of money. The two school buildings we're proposing by themselves are $100 million. We don't have that kind of cash laying around. We have $253 million in projects we're proposing. We don't have that kind of surplus. We are a nonprofit government agency. We are not a for-profit business. We have a $29 million fund balance, that most of which is required by the Texas Education Agency because we get our payments from the state 2 or 3 times a year, and in between those, I need a savings account to make payroll. Our payroll is about $220,000 a day just for payroll. So I need a fund balance just to make payroll and to operate for 3 to 4 months in case we have a hurricane or some kind of natural disaster. We don't have that money to buy school buses or to pay for school buses, to pay for school buildings. This is so much bigger than that. This is a very common assumption. My values have gone up so much and you collect so many taxes, surely you can just do this with your pocket change. That is a misconception that I want to try to address through these presentations. So your tax rate, your school taxes, not county taxes, not city taxes, not Austin Community College, your public school taxes are made up of two figures. Your first and largest figure is your M&O tax rates, $1.04. That is essentially our checkbook. That pays salaries. We use the taxes we collect on that to pay salaries, buy tires for school buses, batteries, fuel, food for students, so forth and so on. It's our daily operating expense, our checkbook. That tax rate has been for about 8 or 9 years $1.04. In August, just August, our board raised that tax rate temporarily by 2 cents to $1.06. That'll get to in a moment when I talk to you about the tax ratification election. So the M&O rate has been $1.04 for a long time. It's now temporarily $1.06. The other part of your school tax rate is debt service or interest in sinking, INS, used exclusively to pay off or repay our debt. That tax rate is $36.75 for a temporary total of $1.4275. If we have a bond election, that affects only the INS tax rate. The last bond election we had was November of 2011, $158.5 million. It increased your local school INS tax rate by 9 cents. That requires a vote by the community. The school board or I can't arbitrarily raise your INS tax rate. It requires a bond election. So last time we had any increase in your tax rate was 2011. If we have a tax ratification election, it affects the M&O tax rate. And that's where we generate revenue to do our daily operating expenditures. And I'll talk to you more about what a TRE is in just a minute. But keep that in mind. We have two parts to your tax rate. M&O is your checkbook. INS is our mortgage payment. Same kind of, similar very much to your personal finance at home. We're having both of these elections this fall. Here's a little bit of a history of our tax rate over the last several years. This is the compression that occurred by the state from $1.50 maximum down to $1. That says right here $1.04. The state compressed our M&O tax rate from $1.50 down to $1. They created a series of pennies that were available to school districts. The first 4 pennies that are listed there are called golden pennies. They're golden, they're valuable for 2 reasons. It only requires a school board vote, and they're not subject to recapture. The state doesn't collect the revenue on those 4 golden pennies. So when school districts across Texas lost 50 cents or a third of their M&O tax rate, nearly everybody immediately voted and added the 4 golden pennies right back. So it went from $1.50 to $1, immediately to $1.04. I wasn't here. I don't know the time frame. It could have been a couple of months. It could have been a year. But fairly quickly, most school boards adopted those additional 4 pennies. And our M&O tax rate has not changed since 2007 and 2008. We've been steady at $1.04. The only change in your tax rate I mentioned was the 9-cent tax increase that the community approved with the bond election in November 11 for $158.5 million. And since that time, the total tax rate has not changed, nor do we anticipate that total tax rate changing for the next 3 or 4 years under our current plan. Keep in mind, nothing can be raised. No part of your tax rate can be raised from this point forward without your vote. It's either a bond election or a tax ratification election. The board can't raise it. I can't raise it. No one can raise your tax rate without your permission. And that's what this TRE is about. Here's a couple of slides with some comparison to surrounding districts. This is 10-year growth over our past 10 years, comparing us to Hayes, Dripping Springs, Leander, Round Rock, Eanes, and Austin ISD. We're by far the fastest growing district in the area. Out of 1,200 districts in the state of Texas, we're probably the 7th or 8th fastest growing in the entire state. 76% growth, that's 4,200 students in the past 10 years. To give you a perspective, there are 1,200 districts in the state of Texas. 80% of those, 850 districts, are either flat or declining in enrollment. Most districts are going down, they're shrinking or flat. The others, the remaining 200 or so, are growing, some. Lake Travis is growing very, very rapidly. There are about 75 districts that qualify for the Fast Growth School Coalition designation from the state, which it means you grow 2.5% a year each of the past few years, 5 years in a row. We grow 5 to 7% a year. We're among the fastest growing in the state of Texas. Here's our tax rate as it compares to those same school districts. We are here at $1.40. However, when you factor in the 20% discount, the optional homestead exemption, which I hope you do factor that in, that changes your tax rate to an effective tax rate of $1.12, by far the lowest in the area. No one else in our area gives an optional homestead exemption except Lago Vista. No one on this side of the lake, and only 200 districts total in the state. So, what is a bond election? This is an election where we ask your permission to sell bonds and then levy taxes based on that. Sold for capital improvements, school buildings, we're building construction, school buses, technology, major renovations, and so forth. It is used, cannot be used to fund any daily operating costs. What I mean by that is, at the end of last bond election we had, 158, if we had $1 million left over, we can't put that money into classrooms or teachers' salaries. That is separated by an impenetrable wall. To be a more specific example, 2 bond elections ago, from 2006, our district earned $9 million in interest on the sale of those bonds. And that bond advisory committee had said, if there's money left over at the end of all of the projects, we'd like a dollar amount, $700,000, to be spent on artificial turf at the football stadium. And we did that, not, however, with bond funds, but with interest earned. We didn't even use bond money for the artificial turf. We used some of the interest. We can't even spend the interest we earn on those bonds on daily operating costs. People will tell you every single bond election, if they'd only spent $20 million on an elementary school, not 25, they could have spent that $5 million on teachers or whatever. It's not true. It is absolutely not true. We just couldn't spend the money. We might pay the debt back earlier and not having spent it, but you can't marry the two at all. People will tell you we can and we should build a cheaper school and use that money for salaries or whatever, and that's not possible in the state of Texas. Why do we need a bond election? I think that's relatively obvious to most of the people that live here. This is a histogram of the last 30 plus years of our school district. The last bar on the right is last year's total. This represents 76% growth, 4,215 students. And when you're looking forward 10 years, this is our demographer's projection. Here's where we are today, or Friday, at 10,364. Our demographer projects we'll be at nearly 16,000 in the next 10 years. That's only 61% growth compared to our actual 76% growth. Somebody will ask me periodically, well, how do you know this demographer is accurate? We've been using a demographer for 10 years. Her first projection was in 2006, and she did a 10-year projection for 2016. Her projection 10 years ago for last fall was 9,200 students. We actually had 9,800 students. She was wrong, but you want her to be wrong to the conservative. You don't want her to overestimate. The good news for you is we don't rely on a 10-year projection. We redo that demographic study every 2 years and roll that forward. And so it's not a cheap process, but in a district that's growing as fast as ours, I think you'll appreciate we need to be as current as possible with our projections. So my point is that 61% growth will probably be low, since this 76% was projected to be 67%. Even if it's 61%, it's about 45% more students than we grew in the previous 10 years, 4,200 compared to the projection of about 6,000 new students coming. So that's why we're calling for a bond election. We know in the immediate next couple of years, her projections are very, very accurate. A couple of years ago, she was in my office going over the projections for that fall. She was off by 2 students for that fall, and she was pretty aggravated with her staff for being off by 2 students. And she's an amazing demographer and very, very accurate and good. The good news is, if she's wrong, or she's off by something, we do the study every 2 years anyway, and so it's as current as we can keep it. Here's a timeline of the work over the last year or so. We had a bond advisory committee that we formed last spring. They made a presentation to the board in May. The board called for the bond election in June. The election will be in November. If it passes, then we'll start construction on the middle school fairly quickly and open that middle school in 2 years from now, fall of 19, and elementary school number 7 in 2020. The process we use is we hired a number of third-party experts, if you will. The first was a demographer that I've mentioned. We also hired separate firms to do a facility condition assessment. They look at all of our facilities from foundation to the roof work and everything in between. Every building we've got, school buildings, athletic areas, fine arts, whatever, administration building, tennis courts, everything. We also hired a firm to do a technology assessment, a separate firm for a furniture assessment, a separate firm for a food service assessment, presented all of that information through our senior staff to our bond advisory committee in January through last May, about 1,000 pages total of information. And the bond advisory committee then met over that entire spring. The purpose of the Bond Advisory Committee is, of course, to represent the entire community, but then to take all of those priorities, nearly $400 million total in possible projects, take that information and narrow that down and bring something to the board to propose a bond election. The board insisted from the beginning, we want the Bond Advisory Committee, among other things, to bring us 2 schools, middle school 3 and elementary 7, and to limit their list to $250 or so million. And the reason the board had that dollar amount was that they knew by our calculations, conservative calculations, we can call $250 million without raising your tax rate. By comparison, the last bond election was $158 million, your tax rate went up 9 cents. We're projecting that we can do $250 million plus dollars with no change to your tax rate. So that was the board's target from the beginning. You got to stop at approximately 250. So here's our bond advisory committee led by local pastor Jeremy Self, and had a parent or representative from every school campus, for retirees, a couple of parents who don't have kids in our school system yet, but they're coming, wide range of people. Home builder there, a former school builder, all kinds of folks on that committee. And essentially their recommendation was $251.7 million for the 2 schools, plus a long list of items that I'll go through for you tonight. Here's a summary of that list, and I'll tell you, there's a much more detailed list on our website now. If you want to go and look at this, I'm going to skim through this a little bit, but there's more detail on our website. The big ticket items are middle school number 3, $76 million, elementary 7, $33 million. Transportation related costs, $13 million, and a good bit of land. We're adding 6,000 students over the next 10 years. We're already planning for elementary 8, 9, 10, 11, maybe 12, middle school 4, and some kind of high school configuration down the road. None of those are immediate like these 2 schools are, but those are on our radar, as I think you'd hope they would be. But then, on top of the $251.7 million, the legislature passed a law in the spring after the Bond Advisory Committee had finished their work that says school buses are now required to have a 3-point seatbelt harness on 2018 buses or later. So we're obviously complying with that law, but the board agreed with our recommendation. How do you put seatbelts on some buses and not the others? Who decides which kid gets the seatbelt and doesn't? So we added $1.3 million to outfit almost all of our buses, all route buses and field trip buses. There'll be a handful that may not have seat belts, but all of our buses, if this passes, will receive seat belts, starting with new bus purchases we make in the spring if it passes, and then we'll retrofit a number of our buses so that we don't have to decide who gets a bus and who doesn't. So that's a new total now beyond the Bond Advisory Committee's recommendation of $253 million. So what do those projects look like? Here's the middle school. Number 3 is essentially a carbon copy of Lake Travis Middle School. We're saving ourselves about $1.5 million in design and engineering costs by using a design we already have. It'll make some modifications because the topography is different on the new site from the site on Bee Creek Road. But $76 million plus a little over $2 million, we have to build a road to get there. It doesn't have access right now, so that's a separate project. The new elementary school will be in Rough Hollow, essentially a carbon copy of West Cypress Hills Elementary. Again, saving about $1.5 million in design and engineering costs by using an existing design. Some minor modifications to the site, to the plan based on topography, but $33 million. Then each of our campuses has a list like this. I'll review the first one, but then just recite the total for you. But they all have similar bullet points. The first bullet point on each of our elementary schools is an ADA compliant playground. We renovated the Lakeway Elementary Playground a couple of years ago to be fully ADA compliant as a result of a decision made by the Office of Civil Rights. We were not in compliance. We renovated that with the understanding that we would renovate all of our elementary school playgrounds when we called our next bond election. We didn't have the cash flow to do $3.5 million for all playgrounds out of our pocket. And so we were able to do this one. It is spectacular. If you've not seen Lakeway Elementary, fully ADA compliant, beautiful surface, wheelchair accessible, very nice. We're going to duplicate that on each of our elementary schools. The second bullet relates to the facility condition assessment. Each of our buildings has a long list of items, some long, some short, of items that need to be done at the campus, like maybe a roof or a kitchen renovation or flooring or HVAC, whatever. Again, more details on our website, but for Bee Cave Elementary, $3.7 million for our facility improvements and renovations. Technology assessment came up with $1.2 million for Bee Cave. Major purchases like school furniture, library books, copy machines, what have you, $1.2 million, and then cafeteria upgrades as a result of our kitchen assessment for a total of $8.5 million for Bee Cave Elementary. Lakeway Elementary, $5.5 million. Lake Point Elementary, $5.3. Lake Travis Elementary School, $6.6. Serene Hills Elementary School, $3.1. And West Cypress, $1.6. One of our newer buildings obviously needs less work, but $1.6 million set aside for West Cypress Hills Elementary. Then our two middle schools have a couple of additional bullets at the bottom for athletics and fine arts. The major amount of the athletic line item is artificial turf on the competition field. We partner a lot with the Lake Travis Youth Association, and there's always a challenge with how much they need our fields and how much we need our fields, and we beat the fields down to concrete every year, and we'd like to be able to put artificial turf on just the competition fields at our two middle schools and up the hill at our track facility here at the high school. So that accounts for the majority of that line item, plus a number of equipments and improvements for fine arts. So Hudson Bend is $6.3 million, Lake Travis Middle School, $3.8 million, Lake Travis High School, $36 million. One of our older buildings, the facility condition assessment identified $18 million in work. Again, if you're curious about the details of that, it's on our website. I would encourage you to go and look at that if you're curious. So forth and so on. Fine arts, we have 3 theaters on our high school complex. You're in the Blackbox Theater, we have the Performing Arts Center, and we have the recital hall in the annex. All of those will get upgrades to lighting, rigging, sound, and so forth. Over $5.5 million just in fine arts alone at the high school. Significant expenditure there to bring our fine arts facilities up to speed. Total of $36.7 million. Then transportation, a total of $13 million. The bulk of that are new buses. We need to replace approximately 40 buses that have reached their end of life. A new bus is approximately $110,000 each. We don't have the cash. We don't have the surplus to even buy a few buses, much less 40 buses. 40 buses is ballpark $5.2 million. 8 or 9 of those are special ed buses. Then new buses for growth. When I got here 5.5, 6 years ago, we transported approximately 25 or 30% of our students on school buses, which is a very common reflection of the average school district in the state of Texas. Generally around a third of your students ride buses. Today, 50% of our students are riding buses. That's good and bad. That's good because less people are on the road. Parents don't want to get in the traffic. It's bad because buses cost $110,000, and because we have lots of money in Lake Travis, the legislature doesn't give us the transportation allotment that other districts get because we already have plenty of money. So we fully fund our own transportation department. We need additional buses just to keep up with our student growth to the tune of $3.4 million, $3.5. White fleet are our maintenance vehicles and Suburbans. We need some additional vehicles there. We're going to expand our transportation facility because the number of drivers we now have, we can't all get them in one place for training. We do very regular training. We need a bigger space for them to meet and take care of that business. We're going to expand that facility as well as add the seat belts that I mentioned already. $13 million. District-wide facilities, administration building, educational development center, some of our other athletic facilities, these are lumped together in this line item to be $18.5 million. Portable classrooms, which will initially go in Lake Travis Middle School next year. Whether the bond election passes or not, we're going to need portable buildings at LTMS next year because of their growth there. And we're doing an expansion of our storage facility, our warehouse and data center for $2.8 million for a total of $18.6. And then land. We're growing rapidly. We have money set aside for land, about $19 million. And then when you're doing this many construction projects, it's fairly expensive for permitting, all kinds of fees and so forth with the county and the cities and so forth. We have 12.7 set aside for closing costs for the bond sales, administrative costs, and contingencies. There's that whole list again. Again, we have more detail on our website. Please go and look at that. And if you don't find what you're looking for, call Johnny Hill. This is as transparent as we know how to make it. We don't want to put 1,000 pages on our website. It's overwhelming. We have much greater detail there. But if you don't find what you're looking for, call Johnny. If he doesn't know the answer, Robert Winovich will, Ed Wooten will, one of the folks that did our assessments will get an answer for you. We want you to be satisfied with what we're recommending. This has already been passed over by a 30-member bond advisory committee and our board. But those of you who weren't in those meetings don't have the benefit of that detail. And so we want you to see what our bond advisory committee and our board has seen. So what's it going to do to my tax rate? Last year, your tax rate was $1.4075. And after the election, it's going to be $1.4075. Now that's a little confusing because I told you a minute ago your tax rate's sitting at $1.4275. And it is. But after the election, and I'll make this clear in a moment, just stick with me, your tax rate is going to be $1.4075. There will be no impact on your tax rate solely based on the bond election, zero. Your tax bill will not go up solely based on the impact of the bond election. Your tax bill is going to go up because your home value is going to go up. You know that, right? It goes up every year. Average went up 10.5% last year. The existing home values probably went up 7.5%, maybe 8%. So your home value is going to go up. Your tax bill is going to go up. Your tax rate will not change. Your tax bill won't change as a result exclusively of the bond election. Last bond election, 9-cent tax rate. This time, 0. So where are these schools going to be located? To orient you a little bit, that is Highway 71. That is 620. And this is Hamilton Pool Road. The dam is right here. Pedernales River is right here. We're sitting right about here in the annex to give you that orientation. Here's where our current schools sit now. And if the bond election passes, Elementary Middle School 7 will be on the far edge of Rough Hollow, facing Bee Creek Road with access from the Rough Hollow side as well. Middle school number 3 will be next to our bus barn and our warehouse, our transportation center, on Vale Divide and there by 71, just off of 71, there at Vale Divide. It gives you an approximate idea of where those buildings will be located. So what's next? We're doing the road show. We've got 35 or 40 of these presentations planned, 3 community-wide presentations, Chamber of Commerce on Wednesday, Keller Williams Real Estate Group tomorrow, probably 6 or 8 presentations a week. Spreading the word as best we can. Early voting occurs beginning October 23rd. Election day is November 7th. Now, here's an important point. If the bond election passes, we will begin construction on Middle School 3 immediately on December 1st, maybe even a hair earlier than that. I got a criticism on Twitter from a parent who said, there they go again. They put the cart before the horse. They've hired a contractor before they've even given us the option to vote. And we did, because it's a good idea. What that person reading the newspaper article didn't understand was we hired a contractor through the delivery method called construction manager at risk. The most common other delivery method is competitive sealed proposal. They're both a bid process. We have very strict laws in the state of Texas about how we bid projects. We followed, in this case, a construction manager at risk. At risk means we've hired a company called American Constructors. We had 7 or 8 people bid on this middle school project, and we hired American Constructors. They are already working and spending money on this project by building construction documents, getting ready for permitting, and so forth, so that we can start immediately on December 1st. We are paying them nothing. If the bond election fails, we pay them nothing. If the bond election fails, frankly, we will go back to the drawing board, cull out some projects we think the voters didn't like, bring back at least the 2 schools in May, and if it passes, then that company will pick right back up. But if it fails forever, they will go away. We will have paid them nothing. We did not spend any tax dollars hiring this firm. The reason we did it, however, was so that if we started early like this without payment, We can start the construction in December, allows us to get into that building in the fall of 2019 instead of 2020. If you have a student at Lake Travis Middle School, you know it's very crowded. And we need every year we can get out of that construction process to go a little faster. So we did this, called the CMAR, Construction Manager at Risk. The elementary school would likely have a more leisurely pace. We would start that in November of 18 and open in fall of 20. So what is a tax ratification election? A TRE is held when we're asking voters to consider raising the effective tax rate. In August, our board raised the M&O tax rate by 2 pennies. It's already been done. The election in November is asking you to ratify that increase by promising to lower the INS tax rate after the election by the same amount, 2 pennies. This particular TRE is called a penny exchange. Most districts do a TRE and they're just raising the M&O. They're not lowering it. They're not offsetting it by an equal lowering. That's the most common. This is not as common. I don't know the percentage of how districts do this, but it's not as common. In our case, through a voter-approved TRE, we're proposing to move 2 pennies from the INS side, our mortgage type payment, to the M&O side, our checkbook type payment. The eventual tax rate is not going to change as a result of the exchange. However, we get an additional $2.1 million in state revenue that is not available to us at the moment. I mentioned earlier, we went from $1.50 to $1, and the school board adopted those 4 golden pennies. There are a series of pennies available by the legislature. The next 2 pennies that we're going for are called silver pennies. They're less valuable because it requires a community vote. It can't be done by a board-only vote. So they're harder to get. But they're not subject to recapture. So the revenue we get to keep is the 4 golden pennies. We're increasing that by 2 pennies. That's 6% of our revenues we get to keep as 4%. Each penny's worth a little over $1 million. So if we pass this, we benefit from having $2 million in additional state aid. How does this work? There is our tax rate from the last year. It was $1.04. The INS was $36.75 for $1.40.75. We added 2 pennies in August. Now our total tax rate's $1.4275. If you vote for that, if you vote yes, here's what happens. Our current tax rates are now $1.06 M&O, $36.75, so now $1.42. If you vote for that, you are ratifying this new higher amount, but then engaging a board-adopted resolution that's already been adopted that then will lower the INS tax rate after the election by the same 2 pennies. It's a sequence effect. It can't be stopped. It is already in place. If the TRE passes, this board resolution is engaged. If the TRE fails, it's rendered null and void. So if you vote for or you vote yes, you ratify the new higher rate, but then simultaneously you're dropping the other side by 2 cents. If you vote against, you vote no for the TRE. There it is currently. You effectively are asking the board then to roll back the M&O that was raised temporarily. One of the 2 things is going to occur. There's no other choice. This has already been set in motion. It's in our minutes. We have the document. We'd be happy to show it to you. But essentially, a vote against is to roll back the M&O, and then the district gets no additional funding. So here's what it looks like for us. You vote for, you vote no. It doesn't matter. The total tax rate reverts one way or the other back to $1.4075. If it passes, we get the $2.1 million in additional state aid. If it fails, we get no additional state aid. What are we going to do with the money? I mentioned that the loss of additional state aid for tax reduction, ASSETAR funding source lost. We lost $2.2 million. We're just filling that hole. It's not going to be spent on salaries or tires or computers, teacher raises. We can't. We're just going to balance our budget. If it doesn't pass, we'll have a $2 million deficit budget. We're not going to close the doors. We're not going to fire nurses or counselors or whatever. We just are hoping to have a balanced budget. How is it possible that we can call a bond election that is 40 to 45% greater than the last election with no change to the tax rate and get $2 million with no change to the tax rate? The answer is in our rising property values. I told you a moment ago that any increase in local values is offset by an almost equal reduction of state aid. You remember that. The state kept the bulk of the $10 million in increase. We got a whopping $300,000. They absorbed nearly all of that, 94%. Hopefully, they'll take less of that in the future if this passes. However, that's on the M&O side. The district gets to keep the increase in values generated by the INS tax rate, our mortgage. So, let's say your home mortgage is $1,500 a month, and Aunt Susie passes away and leaves you $1 million. If you're like my wife, she's going to say, let's double down on our home mortgage and pay that debt off early. You pay down an additional principal amount, you carve off years off of your 30-year note, and millions or tens of thousands, in your case, in your mortgage payment. We do the exact same thing. To the tune of, last year we paid an additional principal amount of 15.7, saving our taxpayers $9 million in interest alone in 1 year. This year we're going to do the same amount, $16 million, $11 million in interest saved this year. Over the past 6 years, we will have saved nearly $40 million in interest by paying our debt down early by capitalizing on the rise in property values on the INS side. That's great news. That allows us then to call for an additional debt without affecting your tax rate. Most people, I think, see that as a good thing. We're capitalizing on the increase in our values. We want to pay our debt off early, way faster than we'd planned to, so that every 4 years it looks like we're going to need an additional bond election. While we can today, let's do $253 million, and it won't affect your tax rate, or by itself won't affect your tax bill. So, how will these things affect my tax bill? Here are 3 home values in Lake Travis ISD, $300,000, $500,000, and $800,000. These are the approximate taxes paid by those homeowners last year. Average home price is $500,000. The tax bill on that house was roughly $5,300. So, how much will your tax bill go up as a result of the bond election and the TRE? Anybody know? 0. None. But your tax bill is going to go up, right? You know that, because your home value is going to go up. So let me calculate that for you. I'm estimating higher than it has for the existing homes of an increase of 8%. So if that's true and your $500,000 home goes up 8%, you'll be paying an additional $450 in school taxes. But if we were implementing a 9-cent tax increase like we did for the last bond election, it would be double that amount. However, we're not raising your tax rate for the bond election. If we had not paid the debt off early over the last several years to give you 0 change to the tax rate, if we hadn't been able to do that, the $253 million bond election would cost you 16 pennies on your tax rate. That would be probably, how much did you say total, Johnny? It'd be an additional 7? On the $500,000, it'd be about $700, a little over $700. On top of the 450? Okay. So triple, not quite triple that amount. Does that make sense? The bond and the TRE are not going to affect your tax rate, or even by themselves the tax bill. But I had another Twitter criticism saying, by telling people their tax rate isn't changing, you're lying to them. Their tax bill is going to go up. I'm making a distinction between your tax rate and your tax bill. Before I get to that, I got this comment recently. A gentleman said, I got to vote against your 2 elections to offset the increase in my home values. I know my home value is going to go up, so I'm going to vote these down. And I tried to explain, if the bond and the TRE aren't going to make your tax bill go up if they pass, they can't make it go down if they fail. There's 0 impact, whether they pass or not. There's no way. You can do that. You can vote against them, but it will not affect the $450 increase in your tax bill. That's going to happen whether these pass or not. Hopefully your tax bill won't go up that much because it won't be 8%, but I'm giving you, a less conservative amount. People will tell you, man, times are tight, the values keep going up, they're taxing us to death, vote against these so it'll cancel out the increase in your tax bill. Not true for your school taxes. It can't mathematically work that way. Your tax bill isn't going to go up because of these 2 elections, therefore it can't go down either. So here's my reminder I was about to talk about a second. There's a difference between a tax rate and your tax bill. What I'm saying today is your tax rate is not going to change. Somebody in the room always hears me, they hear me say, Brad said your taxes aren't going up. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying your home value is going to go up, so your tax bill is going to go up, whether the tax rate changes or not. The good news for this election cycle is your school tax rate is not going to change. If you're over 65, your school taxes aren't going to change at all if you filed for this exemption. It's not automatic. You got to ask for it. But if you're over 65, if your home value quadruples, your school taxes won't change. If the tax rate quadruples, your school taxes won't change. If you're over 65, you are locked into your school tax bill rate valuation in the year you turn 65. So no one here is that age yet, so you're all safe. But in 10 or 20 years, when y'all get there, make sure you ask for that. I'm the closest at 56, but I've got a ways to go. One last area, the ballot language. The ballot language for the bond election is pretty straightforward. This is what you'll see when you go into a voting booth. It'll say $253 million for those things. You vote yes or no, for or against. That's pretty easy. What's not simple is the ballot language for a tax ratification election. Here is state-mandated language. We get 3 blanks to fill in, and we cannot, based on our understanding, we cannot change the language of this ballot at all, other than to fill in the blanks. So here are our blanks. Approve the ad valorem tax rate of $1.4275 for Lake Travis ISD, which is a rate 2 cents higher than the rollback rate, which is $1.04, by the way. The problem with this is it doesn't tell the whole story. I'm prevented by law from adding the phrase I want to add that says, comma, but we're also going to lower it by 2 cents if it passes, and it's going to be $1.40 whether you pass it or not. And I'm prevented by law from telling you that. I can only say the M&O rate is going up. So if you don't know what's going on, you haven't seen the presentation or watched it on a website or called anybody, you walk into the ballot booth and this is what you'll see. That's the language you're going to read. And it's the uninformed voter will say, those people are raising my tax rate, I'm voting no. They won't know that we're also, one way or the other, it's going to drop back to $1.4075, and I'm prevented from telling that. You won't see on the ballot any mention of the board-adopted resolution that calls for lowering the INS rate by 2 cents. The rate will revert to $1.40 whether it passes or not. I can't tell you that in the voting booth. So, I've got Alex Alexander is one of our board members. He is going to kind of close this out, and then we'll be here at the end to answer any questions you've got.
Thank you all for being here tonight on behalf of the 6 other colleagues that are on the board. We appreciate your presence here this evening. Let me wrap this up. So, in summary, we need a bond election to keep up with our tremendous growth. We already looked at the histogram chart that was up there. We've had the 42% growth. We're anticipating 61% growth. Some people have said, can't you just stop people from moving here? And no, you cannot. We cannot just put up a big gate and wall and keep them out. Yeah, Trump's not going to build a wall for us. And so they're coming, whether we want them to or, we're actually happy to have them coming. We're calling a TRE or penny exchange to generate revenue for 2 reasons: significant reduction in state aid or ASETAR over the last 10 years, and then to offset that loss of $2.2 million in state funding. And by the way, that TRE, if it passes, will go to, that's $2.1 million annually. It's not just one-time payment. That happens every single year into the future, along with this reduction in state aid. Also, and this is just new to our presentation, the state has a rainy day fund. Do you have, Johnny, any idea about how many billion it is? 11 billion. And so while the state always has the option to contribute to schools, we're anticipating with the devastation of Hurricane Harvey for any funds that might potentially in the future have gone to education to be appropriately used to help hurricane victims. And so it's important that we get this money now, while we can. And then last but not least, whether we have a bond election or not, whether we call for a TRE or not, whether a bond election passes or not, or the TRE passes or not, our tax rate will remain the same. What happens if the bond election fails? Portable buildings will be necessary next year at LTMS no matter what, and so we've already covered that. Dr. Lancaster mentioned that already. We just are already, what will that look like? I know we didn't see a chart.
4 to 6 buildings.
Yeah, 4 to 4 to 6 buildings per year will be added to Lake Travis Middle School. And some people will say, well, at least they're getting taken care of. Yeah, well, if your student's in that building, you don't want them in the portable building. You want them in the school building. It separates them socially from, having to go outside and other places. And then we just start dotting the campus with trailers. And so nobody really wants that until it impacts them. Additional portable buildings will be necessary in following years at LTMS and possibly Serene Hills and West Cypress Hills by 2020. Also, we'll have to realign our middle school attendance zones, and that gets really tricky. Nobody wants to switch schools. And I sat on an attendance zone committee a couple of years ago when we built the new middle school, and that's tough. And so we really don't want to have to move those boundaries until we need to open new schools. And then additional students are coming year after year. What happens if the tax ratification election fails? The tax rate's going to drop back to $1.4075 no matter the outcome. The district will not receive the $2.1 million. And then it says Lake Travis ISD would move from a balanced budget to a deficit budget. Voting information. Have these been added to the website? I know they were supposed to decide last week. Okay, so we have a board meeting tomorrow night. We'll look at the locations that we've requested, and so we'll add this information to the website. So we'll have, I think we requested 9 different locations throughout the district to which you could vote. So early voting begins Monday, October 23rd through Friday, November 3rd. And then Election Day voting is Tuesday, November the 7th. And then we'll have mobile units available at each one of our campuses, elementary, middle school, and high school, on a specific day, just a one-day event around a specific occasion that will happen. So we'll get that word out as well. And all this information will be available, I suppose, later on this week after the board votes on those locations tomorrow night. So here we go, last set of slides. The bottom line is this. If the bond election passes, your tax rate will not change, and the district will receive $253 million to do that list of projects that we need to do. If the bond election fails, your tax rate will not change. Therefore, the district will not receive those funds, and we will not add additional schools. If the TRE passes, your tax rate will not change, and we'll receive an additional $2.1 million annually to offset the $2.2 million loss. And if the TRE fails, your tax rate will not change at all. So if you go to ltisdschools.org, there's a little link here to Bond TRE that opens up a new section of the website, and all of this information is there and more. So we're glad you're here tonight. Thank you. If you've got any questions, I'll ask Dr. Lancaster to come back up.
Thank you, sir. What questions can I answer? Yes, sir.
I'm a bit confused on how we get the $2.1 million.
Yes.
Is it that the INS rate also has a recapture against it?
The INS rate does not have a recapture. That's a good question. INS is not subject to recapture, and we get to keep those increases in revenues. Our property values have gone up so much, and we keep that revenue on the INS side. It allows us to be able to take some of that capacity off the INS side because of the rising property values, and we can move it over. We still meet our debt obligations. We still can meet any future debt and take on this new debt. We don't need as many pennies on the INS side, so we can move it over. The math of it is we don't actually get more money from the state of Texas. We make a smaller Robin Hood payment to the state. In other words, we keep an additional $2 million. Instead of this year $52 million in Robin Hood payment, we would make a payment of $50 million, give or take.
I gather that was a reduction of Robin Hood.
Yes, sir.
What I don't get is if it's 2 pennies over here that isn't subject to Robin Hood, and you move them to here, now silver penny's no longer subject to Robin Hood, it's no different. What am I missing?
The part you're missing is we can't use the money on the INS side for any kind of our operating budget. We need to move that money over to the operations side to balance our budget. And we don't get to spend the money on the INS side. It's solely, exclusively used to repay debt.
It's maximizing our state monies without costing the taxpayer additional money.
Or sacrificing our ability to pay our debt.
But I will point out one additional
Please.
item, if you don't mind, Dr. Lancaster, and that is on those golden pennies, those are enriched by the state of Texas, so they're actually enriched at a higher level than what we can generate locally as well. The state actually enriches those up to what they call the Austin ISD yield. And they have been raising that yield on an annual basis because what's happening in Austin is their values are going up and their students are going down. So we're able to get what we would levy on those 2 pennies, whether it's INS or M&O, but then we also get those 2 pennies enriched on top of that.
You said gold, but you mean silver?
Well, when they're silver, but they turn into gold once they're passed. Sorry.
It's very complex, and it is not intuitive. It's like our federal tax code. It's just enormous. If you've got a follow-up question, please call Johnny Hill. He will be, Johnny can explain this better than anybody I've ever met, and he'll be happy to talk with you, and we want to make sure you understand what's going on. Yes, ma'am.
So if we don't pass the hearing, we start running a deficit budget, at what point does that then affect our A-plus credit rating, which allows us to borrow all this money less expensively
Right.
on the INS side?
Well, of course, on our debt, when we sell it, we get the permanent school fund rating, which is AAA. But our underlying bond rating, which is a AA plus, which is out of the 1,200 school districts in the state of Texas, the last time I checked, there were about 14 that had the highest AA plus rating. We're one of about 14 that do, which means that our bonds, our debt is very, very attractive to the purchaser, and we also get to maximize the interest rates on that debt. Eventually, they actually audit us about every other year. We have 2 rating companies. We have Standards & Poor, as well as Fitch's, and they switch. One of them are auditing us about every other year. They look at a lot of different items, but one of those items they do look is, are we operating at a surplus, balanced, or at a deficit? So it does have an impact. I can't tell you exactly at what point, but I do know that they do look at that.
So making up that amount that we're losing is going to be important to us on the whole range of our different finances, the M&O and the INS.
Right, because we're growing, it would have a snowball effect over time. It would not be an item that would correct itself. Unless we take external measures to fix it ourselves, because Dr. Lancaster's already proven we're not going to get a whole lot of help from the state. Unless we take external measures, it'll grow over time.
Are you a CFO in a school district by any chance? That's an intuitive question.
Lots of work in school.
What else, please? Anything? Yes, sir.
With the INS funding, since that's going up, 10% a year with property value increase.
Yes, sir.
Absolute dollars. Are we only allowed to use that for servicing debt and sinking funds, or do you use that for these capital expenditures? I'm really coming at this from do we have to borrow to just pay it back? Or
Yes.
do we actually borrow less?
It's not a checkbook. You can't buy things with that money. It's used only to pay off debt. So we have to get the voters' permission to sell bonds for specific things, and you list that detail on our website. And the ballot doesn't have enough room to list it, but it'll all be listed on our website. And then we sell those bonds and pay that back, and but we can't use the money generated on that side to buy school buses by themselves. We've got to do that through bond sales. Is that accurate, John?
That is accurate. Now, of course, we sell the bonds. We put that money in a capital projects fund. That's what we buy these $253 million worth of items. But if you'll notice on there, you'll see technology, you'll see school buses. And some people might say, well, those are items that need to be bought out of the operating budget. And the truth of the matter is we have no more capacity in our M&O budget to do that. So how we actually do that is we actually will pay back these bonds and we match up useful life of that debt. For instance, if you have a school bus that has a useful life of 10 years, we'll make sure that $13.3 million of those school buses are paid back over the useful life of those buses. Exactly the same thing with technology. If we have 7-year technology and we have, I don't know, $28, $29 million of technology, we make sure those bonds are purchased over those 5 or 7 years or whatever that useful life is. We match that up because we do not want to pay a 30-year bond on a 7-year piece of technology that's no good after 7 years. But one other point I'll make, Dr. Lancaster, if you'll allow me,
Please.
Is one reason we try to maximize the capital projects fund is on our maintenance and operational fund. If you think about it, we are recaptured at 42%. So if you buy a bus out of your maintenance and operation budget, take that 110, divide it by 0.58, which is what we get to keep out of that budget, and your $110,000 bus just went up to about $190,000. And so we actually try to do that. If it's capital in nature, we want to try to maximize taxpayers' monies as much as we can out of that capital projects fund. Does that answer your question? All right, thank you.
A school bus out of INS funds is $110,000. A school bus out of M&O funds is $190,000. Because we're paying 42% to the state. Yes, ma'am.
Where's payroll coming from to build the buildings?
On the M&O side, and that's a very good point. There are districts that have opened schools in the past but couldn't afford to staff them. Districts have built a school and it sits there empty for 4 years because they can't afford the M&O budget to hire the additional staff. We will not be in that position. We make sure we're positioning ourselves so that when we open these buildings, we can afford to turn on the utilities. 84% of our budget is payroll, of our M&O budget. The vast majority of our budget is payroll. And so we will not be in that position to do that. We will be able to run these buildings when they open. That's a good question. It's not uncommon, but most districts are able to avoid that.
So that 2 pennies you had mentioned, if you get the 2 pennies, it has no impact on that?
It doesn't allow us to buy anything. It's just filling the deficit. We're counting on the growth we do get to keep up with the growth we get to keep in our M&O side to keep up with the growth in the student body and hire that additional staff. Now, when you open a 7th elementary school, you don't, some significant portion of the teachers that go into that building will come from our existing schools because we deplete hundreds of students from a couple of our schools to open this new building, plus additional students that are new to the district. So Bee Cave Elementary, when we opened West Cypress Hills, I don't remember how many teachers we moved, but we moved 30% of the student body. So effectively, you got to move 30% of the staff. You don't get to stay there and have now 10 kids in your room. Those staff members have to go. So we're not fully staffing at a whole new 100% rate that new building. Some significant percentage will come from the existing staff. When I opened a school 21 years ago in College Station, I opened a brand new building and 50% of my staff came from within the district, 50% of the staff came from outside of the district. It was new expense to the district. So it's not a total new cost you're having to absorb in that first year. Plus we get a little bit of a new facilities allotment, new instructional facilities allotment from the state, which is approximately...
It's gone up to $1,000 per kid for the first 2 years.
So if we open these 2 schools, approximately what would that be?
$600,000.
$600,000 to
2
get
years.
you through that transition of a new building. Some school districts, though, can't make it over the hump. And those are exceptions. Most districts can tolerate that growth, and they're planning it such that you can open that new building with this additional, just a 2-year source of funding that everybody gets when you open a new building. That's a good question. What else? Yes, sir.
The 20% on the homestead exemption that we're different to all the other districts, like regionally.
Yes, sir.
Has the district ever explored reducing the rate and putting that back to neutralize the collected amount, but to compare apples to apples so that you don't have this problem every year? Because then we could put this in a better way.
We need to have you folks on our business staff. Yes, we have talked about that. There's 2 problems with that. And the question was, can we consider tinkering with our optional homestead exemption from 20%, dropping it down to 15 or 10%? There's 2 problems with that. Any change, most people don't know they get the optional homestead exemption. It's not called out on your tax bill, so you don't even know you're getting it. So to take it away would be, in their mind, you're raising my tax rate. And people don't like that. Even if we feel justified, that can occur with a school board vote. However, 2 sessions ago in the 84th session, not this past spring, but the year before, the legislature passed a new law that says if you have an optional homestead exemption, you can't tinker with it. We won't let you. So, no. It's now a mandatory optional homestead exemption. And okay, that's enough on that. I get snarky if I start talking about that. But good question, but 2 or 3 years ago. And that had a 5-year limit on it, by the way, and we're probably in the 3rd year. I'm guessing at the end of that 5-year limit, they'll pass it again for another 5 years. But I don't know that. I'm not a legislator, but that's a relatively new law that we can't touch that now. Generally, if a school board eliminates the optional homestead exemption, it's the last act of a sitting superintendent. The superintendent is fired, the board is recalled, and seriously, because most people don't even know you're getting it. We don't get any love for that because people don't even know. We don't get credit for it because people don't know they're getting a whopping 20% discount. And so if you take it away, people don't see it as, well, we're getting back to where we were. They see it as a 10% or 20% hike in their tax rate. What else? Anything at all?
I have another question.
Yes, please.
More of a school finance question. Back when I was on the Education Foundation, and I went around and talked to the whole world about this, we got a certain allotment per student of like 6,600 per kid, but we spent 7,200. What are the numbers today on what the state allocates to us per student and what our school district actually?
That's a really good question.
Repeat the question,
Okay,
Johnny.
so the question is, of course, that we get monies based on attendance, right? And we get it based on not just kid, but what we call WADA, or weighted average daily attendance. So we get in Lake Travis, we are very, very, I would say vanilla, or we don't have a whole lot of weighted students. In the state of Texas, a weighted student, you get more weights if you have special needs children. You get special needs, additional funding, additional weights. If you have gifted and talented students, state compensatory students, at-risk students, also ESL students, bilingual students, you get additional weights for those. And the average in the state is 1.35. So every kid that walks in, they're averaged in the state anyway up of about 1.35. And when you get WADA or state monies based on that. And in Lake Travis ISD, we're not at 1.35, we're at 1.15. So we're very, very, almost one kid, we get a basic allotment for that. Now it's not, you don't get the same 100% of the basic allotment, you also get it by how often you show up. So in our school district, we have very, very high attendance, about a little over 96%. So we would get a basic allotment based on our WADA, or weighted average daily attendance, times the number of percentage that the kid comes to school. Does that make sense? A basic allotment for our school district is currently at $5,140. $5,140. To educate a student in our district is about $6,600 right now. That's excluding the percentage that goes towards debt payment. That is our operating, that we pay for operating per student.
Basically the teacher salaries and operating schools.
It is. Does that make sense? Okay.
What else? Please feel free to ask anything. All right. We'll close it out. We'll be here, and we'll be happy to answer one-on-one questions if you've got something that comes to your mind in just a moment. But appreciate you being here. If we had anybody watching on Facebook and they're still with us, thank you very much. I'll be curious to see how that works out. And keep in mind, this will be recorded also if you want to go back and look at this. The slides are on our website. This recording will be on our website. Detail about the projects will be on our website. If you don't find what you're looking for, please call us, and Johnny can get you any answer you want. But as Alex, the reason we have a board member helping us do this presentation is I worried that if I'm the one doing these presentations 40 times in the community, I don't want people to think this is the Brad show. There's a 30-member bond advisory committee. There are 7 duly elected board members. This was done with years of discussion and analysis and so forth. We know that there will be a lot of questions about this, but we want our board members to be here to remind you that they have a major hand in this process. I'm not just handing you a bill of goods. And so I appreciate Alex being here. Our board members are coming to most of our presentations to help us with this presentation, but we're all here. If you've got questions, we'll be happy to talk to you. Thank you very much for being here.